Probably. Yep, there we go. Alright.
Hey.
Okay. Says excellent connection. YouTube like, I always bring this up because I'm hoping that maybe someday me bitching enough about it will change something. But YouTube still has the setting thing where they don't give you, like, the ability to make sure that your stream is coming through adequately before you stream with it. So that's always going to be ass cancer, but, one moment. Oh, for some reason I'm not hearing any audio on this end. Let me...
I got you.
No, I mean, I'm hearing you. I'm just not hearing it on the YouTube stream. Let me make sure that everything is kosher here. I don't know why it wouldn't be. And like, I have it on the... Maybe I just have my Vivaldi settings low? That'd be weird. Maybe I just have my Vivaldi settings low? Oh, okay, there we...
Yep, I just pulled it through on my stream. Yeah, it sounds good.
Okay. Alright. Well, that's weird. For some reason, it is not doing that on mine. Whatever. Shaky start. Perfect.
Yeah. to quote Rodney Dangerfield, we're off to a great stop.
Yeah, right? So, because that, I'm going to hit the share button on a few of these things, get a few people in here, and then after that, I should be able to get this going. This is a conversation probably a long time coming. He's had me on his show multiple times, I think. No, once. And, like, we've talked in a group message multiple times.
Yeah.
And the general vibe is that there's a lot wrong, not only with the world at large, but with a few circles we run in. So we figured that we'd have a little conversation here. So with that in mind, the general thing that he does, he tries to promote people he thinks are valuable to libertarianism. And he's all about the removal of centralized power. He has his own podcast called Ungovernable, and he tries to promote people like their podcasts, their projects, whatever is associated with liberty. Think about him as the eyeball zone, but for more people. And with that in mind, why don't you introduce yourself more broadly than I did?
Sure. No, you did a pretty damn good job. I'm someone who 2 years ago would have said that I was a monarchist type libertarian. Voted for Gary Johnson because I didn't know any better. And someone who didn't really know why I was libertarian. I just kind of felt like it was the right thing, right? And so what gave me a really good opportunity the last couple of years with COVID, unfortunately, was to really kind of dive into it and be like, all right, well, what the hell do I actually feel and what do I believe and like what kind of really like resonates with me? And so the first iteration of my show was called Why Libertarian? And it was legitimately just me asking a bunch of other people, like, you know, what they believed and what they were trying to do, or if they were running for office, like what they were running on and the issues and things like that. And then I got involved in some other groups as well to try and feel out that process. And it became extremely obvious to me that I was more anarchist than anything else. And I won't put any more labels on anarchism at all, because I think that just kind of murkies the waters and it kind of contributes to this bullshit tribalism that I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about. But really the show changed to the term ungovernable because of the goal of getting people to actually do things that are, you know, that circumvent the government, that decentralize the power structure that's in place, because I think way too many people are just resting on their laurels and, you know, they think they have to vote harder, or, you know, eventually some golden child will come along that will fix everything for them. And just, that's not the answer. The answer is you need to fix it for yourself. So that's really kind of the nature of it. I could get into my whole background and everything like that, but quite honestly, I would put your audience to sleep. So,
well, you know, it might be interesting. If you want to, you can expand.
No, I mean, I grew up in a typical white middle class household. My father was actually a police officer. Um, we were pretty religious, conservative, right leaning, neoconish type people. I ended up going to a very liberal, left leaning liberal university, which most of them are nowadays. But that kind of showed me how the other half lives. Ironically enough, it was Tulane that I went to, which is the birthplace of Breitbart, which is really freaking funny. So from that, I kind of got exposure to both sides. And I've always been someone who just asked questions. I've always been that why kid, like the really fucking annoying kid that everyone's like, just shut up, stop asking why. And so it really kind of gave me the ability to kind of parse out the positives and the negatives of kind of like those different viewpoints, and then really start to kind of dig into like, all right, well, what really does make sense to me? And so, yeah, I was kind of birthed out of that, but I was really lucky to have kind of like those experiences on either side of the fence in order to kind of draw from and really kind of suss out where most of the bullshit, which like 90% of it is bullshit, as I'm sure I'm preaching the choir here. But yeah, no, that's really kind of where I came from. Anti-war, anti-drug war. Pretty much all government is illegitimate because it rules by force. And then just, everything grows from there.
So your dad was a cop.
Yep.
What kind of cop was he?
Yeah, so he was a local police officer. He was actually a police officer in the town that I grew up in. So there's all kinds of elements of small town Mayberry kind of aspects that come with that. But he was a police officer who I like. First of all, policing is obviously much different now than when he retired, because he retired back in the early 90s. But still, it was still something that, knowing now, if I knew now what I knew back then, I would have taken issue still with a lot of what was happening. But it's, that's been cranked to 11 within the last, 20, 25 years. And so he was actually given the opportunity to become the police chief twice. And he just didn't want to deal with the bureaucracy of it. And so I think he got it. He's still, I mean, like my mother and him are still, thin blue line, be proud of the badge kind of people. But he saw it when he was there. Like, he saw the bureaucracy. He saw they actually had a fissure in the union when he was there. And so they were a PBA, a wholly PBA union force when he started there, and then they split. So then that half the guys were PBA and half the guys were FOP. And so, yeah, it was like, I mean, he saw the inside mechanics of what was happening, and I think he decided that he just didn't want to play the game. He just wanted to keep his head down and kind of like, he was like the person who would have been the poster child for anyone who was like, look, there are good cops out there, because legit, like, he saved someone who was trapped under a high tension wire and shot it with a shotgun in order to get the high tension wire away from them so that the medic could come in and take care of him. So like, everyone loved him, like tons of people freaking knew him. Everyone knew him by name and stuff. But yeah, that was something where, again, that just kind of went with that background, that upbringing. But yeah, he was more local. I mean, he did do some work for like county SWAT and stuff. The other dynamic was, my father didn't make a shit ton of money. Like, as a police officer back then, it was extremely sparse compared to what police officers make now, and so he was working double, triple shifts, not because he was getting like insane overtime. He had to legitimately work double, triple shifts in order to like make ends meet, But yeah, it's a weird dichotomy. Believe me, like, conversations get a little testy sometimes within my family.
well, and of course, he wasn't one of those cops who was like literally affiliated with the gangs. So he didn't have the extra income that a lot of these other cops do. So he had to live like a somewhat normal person.
Yes, yeah, and we were lucky. I mean, I grew up in a middle class to upper middle class, mostly white neighborhood, and so my town didn't have a ton of violent crime or anything like that. So it was, they legitimately spent a lot of their time, like running traffic so the fire department could get a cat out of a tree. Like that was like the epitome of, law enforcement in the neighborhood. But, I can remember him telling me stories about like, they used to be, if you got caught, say like, drunk driving or not even drunk driving, like they caught you walking out of the bar to your car, like they'd be like, look, I'm going to take your keys, lay down, sleep it off, right? And then I'll come back in, a couple hours and give you your keys back and you drive home. That doesn't fly anymore. Like if they did that, they would get immediately, busted or punished or something like that. And so it's a completely different world. It's like he tells me stories about stuff that used to happen that are like he would get fired for now because you just can't let that stuff happen. You can't rip up tickets. You can't, let anyone go.
So, on that score, I've got a personal anecdote. I was like before I moved to Washington, actually, the state.
Yep.
I was like very frequently targeted by the local cops in my hometown. And I was always a person of like I matched a description or something bullshit like that.
Yeah.
One night I matched a description while I was literally running like 2 miles to catch a bus that I needed to catch to get to college. And I was running, and a cop pulled me to the side of the fucking road to try and assess whether or not I was a burglary suspect. And so I saw the lights. I immediately, I'm a pedestrian. I don't have the wherewithal to go on the fucking run. Yep. I had a computer in there that I didn't want to damage, like things. So I sort of I put my hands up to make it very clear that I wasn't going to be a threat. And then like I pulled my phone out and started to record. And I said I'm doing this for my protection. He was understanding, and eventually when he found out that this guy's just a fucking hippie looking guy trying to run and catch a bus, I said I'm gonna be late for the bus. I need to get to college though. So I this is typical. This is the reason I'm an anarchist and that sort of thing. He's like, well, you know what? If you let me frisk you and put your bag in my trunk, I'll drive you to the college. And I'm like, really? And we had a conversation about anarchy on the way to the college.
Yeah.
So that's my reasonable cop anecdote. Like the rest of them are like not as good.
Yeah. No, I would like, again, it gets really uncomfortable talking with the family because I think even they have some cognitive dissonance when it comes to current, policing standards and things like that. But I'm actually really close with a nonprofit here in New Jersey, and Dan Francisco from Blue Star Union has been on my show a bunch of times, and he does this kind of like, man on the street kind of like reporting where he'll go to like a lot of these political rallies and ask them questions. And he's asking them questions specifically to get them into this like hypothetical situation to get them to kind of understand their cognitive dissonance. And so recently it's been a lot of like, anti-mask and vaccine protests or vaccine passport protests. And so it's a lot of conservatives. It's a lot of, conservative Republicans that he's having these conversations with, and he'll invariably ask them questions along the line of like, okay, well, say this does stand and there's still a mask mandate or there's a vaccine mandate. Who's going to be enforcing that, right? And they'll be like, oh, well, the police will. And he'll be like, well, do you hold that against them? And what's funny is like maybe 12, 18 months ago, even when we were in the thick of this, a lot of them would have been like, no, they're just doing their job. And like, I support them and I can't expect them to like, give up their wages in order to do this or whatever.
Nuremberg defense.
Yes, exactly. But what's funny is like the tide is changing. Like people who normally would be at these events now are starting to be like, no, I think they need to stand up with us and fight back against this stuff, and if it means that they have to risk their pension or their livelihood, they should, because they swore an oath to the Constitution or whatever. And so it's changing a little bit. I don't know if we're ever going to see a world where people are completely rational about how intertwined policing and the state, authoritarian government apparatus, how closely they are interlinked. But I think at least it's getting a little better. But yeah, it's those stories are like, and again, like what's funny is the stories of like the good cop stories are always these kind of like heartwarming little kind of like side things. But then the problem is that the juxtaposition to that is, like the dude the other day who had his hands on the hood of the car and like, moved slightly and they just freaking blew him away, right? Like there is obviously not a counterbalance to the extremity of some of those stories.
Or Daniel Shaver. He fucking pulled up his shorts. How dare he? He didn't want to trip and be accused of lunging. How dare he? He had... This is... And that's one of the other things. Like, they've got fucking guns, and if you have a gun, they use that as an excuse to shoot you. Like, fuck you, bitch.
Yeah.
Like, get used to living in a country with guns. That's what the Constitution is supposed to be. So, like, or the fucking therapist who got shot in the leg because he was, like, lying down and trying to talk an autistic, like, adult that he was overseeing down from a fucking, like, meltdown. Or like the guy who was like laying down next to his car, and the cops just fucking shot him anyway, and he died. He just bled out on the street, and we wouldn't know about that if somebody wasn't like leering around a monument sign with their phone, going like, "Hee, I got your picture," So, and or like, fuck, there's that guy, James Boyd. I think he was a homeless man in Albuquerque who.
Yes.
Oh no, he had a tiny, tiny knife. We should sick a dog on him, throw a grenade at him, and shoot him to death. That's a response.
Yeah.
Or fucking Eric Garner. He sold loose cigarettes. Let me remove his heir permanently. That's a.
Yeah, and now here's the thing that people have a problem, really kind of connecting the dots on though. They think that. They typically fall into one of two camps. They fall into the camp of, oh well, there was nothing else they could have done, right? They're just trying to protect themselves, right? And then there are the other people that fall into the other camp where no matter what they do, they're wrong, right? Mm-hmm. And it's really tough because a lot of times I feel myself drawn into one of those camps more so than the other. You can imagine which one. But there are these other instances where there is nuance associated with it. So, for instance, we had a situation here in New Jersey where a cop rolls up to a domestic situation. Two women run out of a building that the police officer's driving up to. I think there's another dude who's there. And so, like, this scuffle's happening. And so the dude runs over, kicks the one girl in the face, and then the other girl gets chased with a knife, okay? And the police officer shows up, and within the first 15 seconds has to essentially, make a command decision about what happens here. Well, the police officer, regardless of who started it, right? There's one woman chasing another woman with a knife, pins her on top of the car, and then the police officer fires at her. So then immediately the people that are on the, the obviously like ACAB, kind of side of the argument, they say, oh, well, like yet another summary execution, stuff like that. And we have to be really careful about that because for me, my standpoint is always apply the same standard of care that you would to an average person that you would expect to be able to arm themselves and address the situation, right? So if you yourself, I live in fucking Soviet Socialist Republic of New Jersey, so we can't carry a firearm. But if you could have a sidearm on you and something like that happened where one person was pinning someone else with a knife and it looked like they were about to freaking, Friday the 13th them, you you are going to react pretty much the same way that that police officer reacted. And so in that situation, you can't now all of a sudden, that doesn't just fit into that narrative anymore, right?
Right.
It's aside from it. And so, again, I mean, like, we'll talk about some other things here coming up that have some nuance associated to them that I think a lot of people just want to kind of paint with a broad brush, right? But at the end of the day, it doesn't change the fact that, like, when it comes to policing, my solution obviously is not to have the state or government in control of force with a monopoly on force, right?
Yeah.
That is just not a productive situation.
Yeah, well, and you know, on that score, I'm actually working on a documentary that's like intending to constructively answer the question of how to improve those relations, have a better service in that regard, and generally, the vibe we're going for is this is the problem, this is how we solve it concretely. And it's actually on the same production team as the Monopoly on Violence documentary. So y'all can check out the site statelessfilm.com if you want more information about that. But basically, one of the things that I've noticed is what I'll do is I'll be looking for names, because I'm up to about 47 names so far that we're going to go over who are basically shot for bullshit reasons or killed for bullshit reasons. Like, it's not just George Floyd. There are a lot of people who have been killed because a piggy pork laid on their neck with his knee for a while. Like, that happens a lot, actually. And when I really started to look into these numbers, I was like, this was allowed. So, like, the general vibe I think that needs to happen is cops need to start to, like, assess their sort of ripple effect better. They need to look at how they affect the community better. They need to understand that people aren't going to like them any better if this is how they operate. If it's always about escalation, if it's always about violence, if it's always about kill. And additionally, the state creates a really, like, repellent environment for, like, any sort of positivity. So, like, ultimately, they create the circumstances that make a bitch want to go at a bitch with a knife. So, they created those circumstances, very likely, and they created this society where it's okay for man to live at the expense of man, and then suddenly, they can come in and exploit situations where that's allowed. Like, the state is nothing but, like, fucking a gang of thieves writ large, like Rothbard said. You know, it's nothing but like the mob that people actually like, and like not enough of them either. Like, most people don't even vote, but like enough of them that the society can keep moving in this fucking circle jerk ass direction. So, like, the ultimate truth is that this society is what creates these conditions to begin with. And like David Icke would say, it's a problem, reaction, solution kind of thing. Like, they create the problem, they wait for the reaction, and then they, like, shove their prepackaged solution down your throat like a tube of salami. Like, so it's one of those things where, like, yeah, there's nuance in the action that the cop took, but there's also nuance in the build-up to the situation to begin with. And it's always valuable to remember that. Like there was a woman who died like very recently because she was at a protest because, like, a cop killed somebody she was related to, I think. And like, they shot a rubber bullet directly at her head, and it fucking killed her because it embedded in her skull, because it's still a fucking bullet, and these cunts will shoot rubber bullets at people or tear gas grenades or whatever directly at them. One of the people that we're going with for the doc, Norm Stamper, he had a part in his book where he says that he started to realize that the problems were a lot more personal and systemic when somebody came to one of his book signings and said they used to respect him, but they were one of the protesters he unnecessarily ordered to be gassed. And the protest was peaceful until that point, and then it got violent, and then they had more excuse to be violent. And it's one of those things where, like, you know, the cops created the situation, the cops made the situation worse, and then the cops said, well, hey, without us, we wouldn't be able to deal with these sorts of situations. Or, sorry, he's fucking probably more like, without us, we wouldn't be able to deal with these sorts of situations. So, like
sounds like where was he from? Long Island?
I think New York, if I remember correctly, and then he transferred
right.
to San Francisco. I don't know. I'll have to re-go over that. I might have just fucked up, but either way, the point is that like the whole notion, the whole idea of policing, if it's not about protection first, then it's not about policing. It's about like control, and when it becomes about that, when it becomes about control, it's no longer about reason. It's no longer about like keeping society shielded. It's about being the shield for those who run society, making sure that their bottom lines are kept, being an order follower, and filling out performance and shit. And that's a significant problem, you know? And I think that's what leads people to that. Like, you put us here, and now you're going to be angry with us for it?
Yeah. Well, and I think they, I think they don't like, it's most people that don't like this. It's not just police officers, but people don't like realizing that the reality that they live in isn't what it actually is, right? So like a lot gets made of, you know, red pill, black pill, blue pill, whatever. Regardless of what kind of imagery you put on it, the moment that you find out that it's all bullshit is very scary, and it destroys pretty much everything that came before it. It's like, you know, any movie where someone wakes up, like, I mean, it's again the fucking Matrix, but like, you know, freaking Neo sitting there talking about like, you know, I have this lifetime of memories that never fucking happened, right? Like, that exact dynamic is why people will fight with their entire being against coming to that realization, right? So they'll defend to their death this reality that they hold so dear to them, even if there's a chance that it's not true, right? Because they'd rather be ignorant to its untruth than cognizant of the fact that it's all bullshit, right? And so the same thing applies within that law enforcement mechanism, you know, and, you know, to boot, like, you know, there's all the memes, and some of it is actually extremely truthful. I mean, the IQ dividing line, that they don't want smart police officers, at least not smart in the sense that they can think for themselves. I mean, that's exactly true. It's also the dynamic that it has become. It is the, I don't know, we've lost track now, the sixth arm of armed service. Like, that's basically what it is. You know, it used to be a, what do they call it? Like a civilian military, you know, kind of organizational structure. It's not civilian anymore. I mean, it's those people are essentially getting hired into a military infrastructure, and it's really easy to see too. You show me a really shitty police department, I'll show you a shitty police chief, and then the people that are immediately below the police chief in terms of the hierarchy of structure. Like, you know, they'll be the ones talking about how, you know, essentially, you know, the warrior cop aspect and all this other stuff. They'll be the ones preaching that mantra, and all the lower level, you know, they just kind of fall in line because they have the cover, right? They have the cover of whoever the highest person is on the totem pole, and so, oh well, I was just following orders, right? Like, so. What's crazy is when this shit happens, how many police chiefs aren't brought up on charges as a result of this stuff, because I know for damn sure if you're an employee and you did some of this shit, the CEO and the company are being brought up on charges.
Hello.
Yeah, and you know, it doesn't seem to stick in this space because of that. Again, it's no longer any civilian component of it. It is another branch of the military effectively now.
Yeah, well, and of course, they have no accountability because it's not like they have to carry insurance, and if they kill somebody, their premiums go up. It's not like they have to license their firearms, and if they, you know, off somebody unnecessarily, they lose it forever. It's not like they're held at the same. It's not like they can, even if they're like disciplined, they can oftentimes just get disciplined by being fired, and then, oh, we shipped them over a county over, they'll be fine.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It's really scary too to think of the fact that you could have someone who is legitimately clinically probably insane, or at least sociopathic. They do something in one place, And then the answer is just, okay, well, just, send him somewhere else so that when he does the next fucked up thing, it's not our mess to clean up, right? Like, that's really screwed up in terms of the way the system is built.
Yeah, and of course it's the way the whole system is built too. Like everybody's kicking the can down the line, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
And so, oh man, I'm gonna try to find real quick the cop gets a real job comic. I can't put it on screen because I don't have it set up right now, but yeah, right here. Okay. Uh, it's fucking hilarious. I like this a lot, and I post it whenever I want to irritate. In fact, I might post it like after this. Uh, Cops get real jobs. Because there's like he's holding a newspaper and it says like defund the police, abolish the police. Why not both? Wait, I have to serve everyone. If you want a tip. This job is thankless. I demand respect in 6 figures, plus overtime and no work, while he's wheeling around a janitor cart.
Yeah.
The thin bed mint on the side of it. You, baseball, like, umpire or whatever, he's like, you can't show up my record to the public. It doesn't even mention his domestic violence record. Wait, anyone can leave a complaint at the Dunkin' Donuts, leave a coffee comment, and I can't beat them? Construction worker guy, I killed 1 person in cold blood and that's a fireable offense. What good is a union that doesn't support its murderers? It's fucking great.
The beauty is of something like what Blue Star Union does is like just what that meme does. Put what they do in the context of any other line of work, right? Mm-hmm. And it is just nonsensical. The fact that what happens and is condoned as acceptable behavior, literally nowhere else, even in the actual military, fighting like, overseas in terms of their rules of engagement. Now, we can talk about Afghanistan if you want. We can talk about how, PMCs, I mean, I was on the End the Damn Wars 12-hour live cast with Magnus Panvidia at the end of last week, and Inked Anarchist was on there, and he was talking about PMCs and waging essentially actual war for profit, like private war with, essentially dark troops that no one knows are actually operating, and having rules of engagement that are just completely, mow anything down that moves, like total war kind of, directives. But take a police officer and put them in the context of, a normie military service member over what used to be in Afghanistan, now in, whatever, Somalia or pick a fucking country. But, the rules of engagement are completely different, right? Here it's like shoot first, shoot twice, like ask a couple of questions, shoot again if they're still moving, right? Over there, there's all kinds of like acceptable standards that have to be followed. It's insane.
Yeah, Scott Spaulding, I had him on. I don't think he likes me much anymore, but I had him on a while back to discuss that, and he was like ordered to go into this area and just take out the targets, and like he remembers watching them spill out of the thing, and it being like horrifying for him because he realized what he was doing, and then like everybody's trying to make him feel better about it, but it's like you don't feel better about that. No. Not if you have any sort of decency at all. So, yeah, like, and on that score, because let's get into that a little bit.
Sure.
For a long time, I've been very annoying to a large group of people. But the general vibe of the Afghanistan shit is that I've been constantly telling them, this isn't done. Mm-hmm. It's the Afghanistan war is not over. And I've come out with multiple articles recently that maybe Magnus might want to tweet a link to or something. But basically, the 2 articles, will he, won't he, he won't, Afghanistan is too profitable to leave, and also, how the U.S. made the Taliban. Because the Taliban is... Okay, so Operation Cyclone happens, and Jimmy Carter basically says, hey, we'll shovel a bunch of money at the Mujahideen if they beat back the Russian menace. And so they do this. They fund the Mujahideen. They give them guns. They teach them how to make like IEDs and shit. There were no suicide bombings in the region until the U.S. got there.
Yep.
And then after all of this, suddenly there are a bunch of threats in the region that the U.S. uses as justification to start killing Afghanis because they're, Russians have been beaten back, so we gotta have a new target. And so that happens, and then like suddenly there's Al Qaeda, Al Nusra comes up down the line, ISIS, ISIL, ISIS Special K brand, the whole like thing here of like we'll create these enemies, and then the Taliban is like was founded initially by previous Mujahideen supported by the CIA and like a local government office that was basically a CIA puppet. And then people forget that. People forget that bin Laden was actually Tim Osman, and he had a camp and coast funded by the CIA. People don't like thinking this way because it pokes little micro holes in their idea that the U.S. has to go solve a humanitarian crisis, or that the U.S. not managing things will make everything go to hell. I mean, the U.S. is still managing things. The U.S. paid $53 million to the Taliban in 2001. And they, like, people forget that because now they're like, oh, why did they leave all these weapons? Well, maybe because it's another lump sum, bitch.
Yeah. No, that's exactly what it was. It was and what's funny is, like, every so often one of these pressers, there is, like, those nuggets of truth that come through, right? So, like, what have they been consistent in saying all throughout? Oh, well, we've been in contact with the Taliban ever since. Of course they have. They've been in contact with Taliban since they started there freaking 40 years ago, right? Like, there's never been a moment where they've been like, no, we're not talking to you, it's all out war. Like, there's always been this, like, it's not a camaraderie. It's like, it's almost like political in a sense, right? It's like, it's political kind of like, butting of the heads. And that's
theater.
exactly that. It is completely theater. The end of this, like, and here's the thing, like you were talking about kind of like people not wanting to accept what the actual truth is in terms of like how these enemies get made and stuff like that. It's they like the movie where it's nice, like there's the obvious hero and there's the obvious bad guy and they fight and there's some conflict and then the hero emerges triumphant at the end, right? Real life is messy. It's not like that. Like everyone sucks in this situation. There's no hero, right? Like there's literally no hero. But they, normies want to put it into that perspective. Like, who's the good guy we're rooting for and who's the bad guy that we're like shaking our fist at? And so when it came down to this, like, what was the default? Everyone who was like an anti-Biden person was like, oh, he screwed it up and everything got effed up. And, this was done on the back of a napkin. Right. And then everyone on the left who was pro-Biden was like, oh, well, this was always going to kind of happen this way and it's Trump's fault and all this other stuff. And you're like, look, the truth is not what any one of you say it is. Right. The truth is that this was a planned event, that these things that are happening in terms of the atrocities and stuff like that are probably not individually planned. They are a function of that kind of changeover in power structure, right? So, look, as much as the Taliban are like cutthroat type of leaders, there's a bunch of them that probably go rogue and do their own fucking thing every so often. And so when the U.S. is on their way out of town, they're like, all right, let's stick it to them one last time, right? Like, so this whole thing, though, is just, it is a redux of funding the Mujahideen to fight against Russia, right? Because you leave them armored vehicles, you leave them weapons of war and things like that.
Drones. They have drones now.
Drones, a ridiculous stockpile of cash to essentially rebuild the support for their inner, their inner structure. You already have generals talking about, oh, there's going to be a civil war in the region. Well, yeah, that's why you fucking funded the Taliban, to make sure that they fight off all of these other, power structures that are trying to vie for the top seat, right? And in doing so, you're trying to make sure that you stock the cabinet for them to win, so that if in the midst of all this mayhem, China or Russia gets squirrely and wants to come in and take over a piece of the action, they can repel that as well, or at least hold them off long enough until we actually end up getting re-involved again.
Right.
But
Well, and,
that's not the happy, like, superhero and villain and, like, who's good, who's bad, like,
well, and that's the, like, part of the thing there, though. Like, Biden and his supporters, they're not leftists. They're Republicans who don't like being called Republicans. So, like, Biden supported the Iraq War. He thought gays were going to be a part of the downfall of society. He eulogized the Cyclops of the Ku Klux Klan. He never met a lobbyist he didn't like. He helps corporate asset hiding. He's right wing. Anybody who says he is not, and also like calls Trump right wing, needs to analyze the similarities between their two policies, because the fact that women and like transgender people can be drafted now, it's like not better. It's more war. It's more right-wingism. It's just done with a rainbow flag. Like, these corporations, everybody rainbow washes their bullshit or, like, tries to make it more inclusive. They don't actually care. They just want more money, more power, more influence. And that's exactly what Biden wants. So, in the end run of this, like, Biden's not any, like, more leftist than Trump was, and he's doing a lot of the same stuff. Trump wanted to be out in May, allegedly. He's out in August? Maybe. No, he's not. There's still plenty of PMCs on the ground. And, like, I had proof. I posted proof in articles that were written about 18,000 private military contractors that were shoved into the region. It's not okay for you to bring that up, though. That's a verboten subject. You are Lügenpresse, and we will censor you.
What a country!
Yeah.
The nationalism is also something that is shared between both sides, whether they want to admit it or not, or they're all lumped into one big pile of shit side. That nationalism, they just call it different things, right? So, like, the whole, like, anti-America, like, the traditional conservative right viewpoint of, if you don't support the troops, like, you're anti-American, that kind of thing. The same nationalism exists on the same collectivism exists on, what people would purport to be the left. But, I run into this a lot. I'm not great with language to begin with. And so the problem is I always get stuck in between two worlds, right? Am I using normie words with normie definitions to try and, like, have that conversation? Or am I having conversations with people who understand nuance and, won't misread the conversation if, I refer to someone as right and, but they voted for Biden. And you're like, oh, hold on, you're not following the conversation. And so I find that extremely difficult. I rewatched 1984, the color remake of it the other night, and I was like, holy shit, this is, like, so fucking spot on. I was like, it is really freaking eerie how prophetic just the underpinnings of how that society was constructed in the mind, and the different elements that needed to be put in place to get there. And it repeats itself over time too. So, like, I mean, obviously 1984 is written kind of in this lead up or understanding or post-mortem of World War II and kind of how that power structure came into play post World War I. And so you see that then, like, echo itself throughout each generation, how these things end up playing out, and the verbiage that both sides use, or what you think are both sides, is extremely difficult to navigate. And it's a feature, it's not a bug, right? Like, it's there intentionally to make it so that there can't ever be a group of people that agree on one thing, and that one thing be anti what the central power has in store or has planned out. And it's frustrating as hell, but at the same time, that's also kind of why I take the slant that I do. Like, I think a lot of people need to stop looking out there
Yeah.
and start looking in here, right? Like
They need to kill the cops that are in their head telling them what to do.
yes, yes, uh, and a lot of that societal bullshit that exists right now is mostly self-imposed. It's the prison where the gate is closed but it's unlocked, and no one thought to walk over and just push the door open. You
Yeah,
know?
well, and like so, 19. I want to add to that. 1984 is a good place to start. Also, Brave New World, where
Mm,
people are drugging themselves into complacency with the soma and shit.
hmm.
Soylent Green / Snowpiercer, where they're feeding people things that they normally wouldn't eat because the society is set up so that the poor people have to subsist while the wealthy and the powerful can live.
Yeah.
Um, The Running Man, the book, not the movie. I get homicidal talking about the movie, and I'm not. Someday I'm gonna do like a long ass video on exactly why, but I'm gonna actually have to like stop the recording and do multiple takes because it fills me. I'm getting the rage right now. You can hear my voice stopping. The book, not the movie, because that talks about the fact that the media control and the close relationship between corporations and government is creating the future that we have. And it's also a dystopian sci-fi book written by Stephen King. So if any of you needed a better reason, also there's Brazil, where all the information's coming from central hubs. Like there's a lot of things to watch, and a lot of people who've sort of gotten it. Black Mirror. If you have not watched the series Black Mirror, go fucking do that.
Yeah.
Same with Philip K. Dick's Electric Dreams series on Amazon. And then, like, just to top it all off, because I have to, it's a religious obligation, the freedom-fighting aspects of the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise. Like, there's a lot of good stuff in fiction. Like,
Yeah.
and one of the, like, agoristically, Konkin had something he called the free fanzine, where he would tell people to go read these sci-fi books and sci-fi, like, periodicals and shit, because he thought that you could get access to people's brains a little bit easier by saying, yeah, no, this isn't happening here, it's happening somewhere else. It's just a lot like what's happening here, but it's totally not happening here. It's like a sort of way to circumvent that. And that's why Heinlein gave him an interview when he wouldn't give other people interviews, because Heinlein knew that he got it for, like, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress.
Yep.
Yeah, also a good one, by the way.
Yeah, no, there's a ton of that stuff out there where, again, I mean, people have talked about this at length about, how a lot of that societal control comes from that pop culture-y, kind of entertainment aspect of people's lives, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And it also can be used as not a power for good, but like just a key to unlock people, kind of like drawing those parallels or making those connections. But yeah, it's really freaking crazy to see that stuff play out, and then see the echoes of these things that a lot of people grew up reading, or the other one is Animal Farm, right? And kind of the construction of that society. The other beautiful aspect of some of those like science fiction-y kind of works and stuff like that is also understanding what the true background of some of those things are. So like a lot of people read Lord of the Flies, and Lord of the Flies, everyone who has read it is like, oh my God, it's awful. Like they kill I'm sorry, spoiler alert, it's been out for fucking ever. So if you haven't read it, but they kill Piggy and then all of a sudden they're saved and that's awful, right? And you're like, oh, well, do you know what the actual story a bit about those kids are? And no, people are like, no. And they're like, oh, they got stranded on the island. They created like a rudimentary government. They all got along. They all had like specialized jobs. And then when they were eventually saved, like they weren't killing and eating each other or whatever. It was like everyone was cool, right? Like, and you're like, oh, well, that doesn't sound like a great story. And you're like, well, yeah, obviously that's why the work of fiction kind of like twisted it on its head, right?
Yeah.
But understanding the background story of those things is also extremely important, because it gives you that perspective of the way that this person took things, the creative that was behind it took it and kind of like put a different slant on it, or said, okay, let's find where the breaking point is, or let's see where I went to school for biomedical engineering. And so one of the courses that we had to take as part of that training was bioethics. And bioethics is very much now just a kind of affirmative action, not in terms of race or anything like that. It's more of just a check the box kind of thing now that people in the biomedical technology world kind of have to deal with. But back then they were legitimately, I mean, like in the early 90s, we were asking questions that were like, well, if we did this, if we went down this road, like how would we fuck things up, right? Like how should we not do it, or should we
the Jurassic Park line?
Exactly.
You spent so much time thinking about whether or not you could that you never stopped to think about whether or not you should.
Yes, and that a large component of that bioethics conversation lived in the world of these kind of like very dystopian sci-fi novels and works, because and then relating them back to actual shit that happened throughout history. And so a lot of people don't get that type of education where you're like, okay, well, Mangala did this, and people are like, oh, well, that was awful. He didn't have consent. We did end up with some like, things happen over here. And you're like, okay, well, that's the same thing that's happening now in this other area. And they're like, oh, that can't be true. That's not right. Like, no, that happened a generation ago. That doesn't happen now. And you're like, no, the exact same shit happens now. You're just not connecting those dots because they're too far removed for you at the moment.
I had that experience. You want to talk ethics? I took separately an ethics and a philosophy course in college, and most of the class hated me by the end of it because I kept on like asking annoying questions and being like okay with saying no to other people, and like it would be like an argument across the class. The teacher hated me eventually too because I would like follow him outside the classroom and ask him off hours questions because I wanted to pick his brain and see if he actually had any philosophical integrity. Spoiler alert, we're all borrowing our matter from the universe, so self-ownership doesn't exist, and that's why anarchy is bad. So, yeah, I didn't get along with him after that, and I basically didn't continue that sort of, like, because after you find something like that out, that's what somebody believes, there's nothing you can do. Like, if you have no personal stake over your own shit, and he also didn't identify as a moral relativist, a cultural relativist, and I was like, what? How can we not own ourselves and have no actual standard for ethics? Or are you saying that the standard for ethics is a lack of self-ownership? In which case, how do you even have ethics at that point? It's one of those things. People are not interested in having those conversations, to put it mildly.
Yeah, it's that, and I definitely don't want to go down that road because we could talk about that for hours. But it's something that I've gone down that road a little bit with other people too, and it always, again, one of the things you run into is always that definitional divide. Like, what does someone define, ethical or moral, or just right and wrong, right? Like, so you have to kind of like play that definition game first before you can then like further that conversation.
Establish common ground.
Yes. Yeah. You have to, and like you said, once someone identifies themselves as what you're talking about in your specific instance, you're almost like, okay, well, we're at an impasse. We can no longer have a conversation because you're living on Mars and I'm living on Venus, and there's no way this is going to ever be something that we can reach any kind of resolution on. But just that very nature is why I am more on the anarchist side, because when you try and centrally plan life based off of any one of those like global standards, you're fucking a bunch of people over. Yeah. Right. Like that's basically what you're doing. That's the only thing you're accomplishing. You're being okay to a handful of people and then screwing everyone else. And so that's why, just logically, from my standpoint, I'm more that anarchist than I am, say, like, some kind of minarchist, or like, just a little bit of control, like it just doesn't work out,
So on that score, we've got Lux in the chat going, why did Biden take us out of Afghanistan, though? What's the catch? That's what I want to know. Well, I don't think he did. I think we're still there, and that's why he's saying we're not done with you yet. I think there are a bunch of PMCs over there, like the 18,000 that were already being talked about in like January or something. Like, by the way, everybody go subscribe to Abby Martin, Empire Files and shit. She does really good work, and she's the reason I know about the 18,000 people. Like, you follow enough good people, and it sort of like puts the pieces into place, and you stop asking so many questions because you start getting to where the real important salient questions are. Like, were those PMCs ever taken out, and how do we know? What about the black budget money that constantly gets, quote, lost, like the trillions lost in 9/11, or some of these other instances? And then you start to realize, hey, it's all fucky, and we don't actually know. Like, I'm assuming your answer is somewhat similar?
Yeah, I would say there's also another dynamic here where, and this actually kind of falls in line with the woke military conversation that we were having before. We're also getting to the point in our imperialism where, the things need to be shifted around because there's only so many assets that can be deployed in one location versus another. And so there is obviously more conflict brewing in other countries right now that are I guess higher priority in the long run, or at least they're higher priority now. And so, why is the military woke? Well, it's because they have a recruiting problem, right? Why are we moving out of Afghanistan? Well, it's because the enlisted military, the people that are officially on the books, are going to be redeployed elsewhere. Okay, it has nothing to do with strategic objectives. It has nothing, or not in terms of Afghanistan. It has nothing to do with strategic objectives within Afghanistan. It has nothing to do with the, Biden waking up one morning and being like, "Oh wow, war sucks." Like, that did not happen. Okay.
Imagine the guy who supported the Iraq War doing that at all, ever.
Yeah. No, it didn't happen. Like, it's not in the plane of existence. It's to draw an analogy. It's like, you're playing a game of Risk, right? There are only so many units on the board, and you have to reallocate them to some areas, and you're not getting any extra guys every single turn. Like, in fact, your pipeline of getting new bodies to throw in the way of these things is getting less and less. And if you noticed, obviously over the last 20, 30 years, our military has become way more focused on technological warfare than they are on actual, ground assaults and things like that. And it's a matter of necessity. It's because there's less bodies willing to get in the line of fire. And that's a multitude of reasons why, but I see Afghanistan as that. I see it as a just kind of like, it was like when Trump had, like, again, air quotes, the troop drawdowns, right? It was just rearranging pieces.
Yeah, you just fucking put a little over here, a little over there, just a smattering,
Yeah.
And then there's like three other elements of it, like that people that are okay, so. Suddenly the CIA and a bunch of other fucking people are putting out these ads like, oh, we're empowered, inclusive bullshit. Like that one with the woman who's like, I'm the daughter of immigrants. We're all immigrants. We're immigrants. We immigrated, and we're all fucking inclusive. I'm a proud woman. This is what I call feminism, etc., 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 etc.
Yeah.
They've run, and like that. Then that other ad, which the Russians mocked, because it had like a cartoon of a woman. Like a little cartoon. It's a cartoon of a woman going through like some hard stuff, like going through basic, and eventually like her tearful bullshit happens, and then that's what they want you to think. That's how they want you to. So then they've got a bunch of new recruits because they're more inclusive, and everybody's all hippie, hunky-dory. We're all fantastic, ain't we? But they're still warmongers and pieces of shit. So they, in the end, they get more bodies on the line. And then, while that happens, there's a huge lockdown and a huge transfer of wealth from the bottom to the corporate class, the corporate and government class. And this transfer of wealth, it fucking makes a lot of people quit their jobs because they're suddenly making more money on unemployment, etc., than blah 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 blah. So we need more workers doing menial shit. Let's draw down in Afghanistan. Let's make a humanitarian crisis, and let's evacuate a bunch of fucking refugees to America where they will need stable work. And they'll do whatever we want because it's better than living in Afghanistan, the country we fucked up for the past 50, 60 years. And then to top off all of that, we get to have a destabilizing effect in Afghanistan for a really fucking long time that the U.S. government gets to say, oh, whoop, see, here's what happens when we leave. You want it again? Well, fuck you again. We'll do it, but you gotta beg.
Yep. No, it is. A lot of people want to think that politicians are stupid. Politicians are not stupid. They are smart, and they are fucking evil.
Yes.
Okay? So when they have conversations about these things, they play out all of these possibilities. And they're like, oh, well, this probably isn't going to end well. So what we need to do is we need to hedge our bet in this area. If this contingency happens, then we'll always have this thing that we can spin, in order to move in that direction. And so that's exactly what they're thinking about. They're also thinking about the next time something like this happens. Yes. So when they get involved with they're increasing their involvement in Africa, in African conflicts right now. When we get involved in that quagmire, okay, and the next time it comes to pull out, they'll be like, well, remember, last time we tried to pull out, all this other bad shit happened and people died, so we can't do that again, right?
And bombing there before giving American stimulus checks. Let's not forget that.
Yeah. Well, that's par for the course, man. That's the broken window theory of economics, I guess. I don't know.
You can't help people live if you don't kill a bunch of people, man. You gotta kill all these people. You gotta kill. And then you can suddenly get enough money that you can stimulate the economy.
This is like... It's like a 4-year-old playing with ants, really. I mean, it's basically what it is. It's like, the magnifying glass.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah, and then, like, all this... So, we're talking about this stuff, and we actually know. We're wise to it. But then, like, suddenly, we get the shaft in a lot of other discussions because we're not towing the line people want us to tow. So just because I know we've been talking already for an hour and you probably want to wrap it to a close, let's talk about some recent developments with the the community that should be principled, not the community of principle, not the party of principle, but the community that should be principled but fucking isn't. Because as you know, I was kicked out of a GM recently, blocked and called an annoying faggot, among other things, because I had the audacity to post a link about a Thaddeus Russell piece in response to Thaddeus Russell being interviewed as a subject matter on Emma Goldman. That Thaddeus Russell piece was him defending Roman Polanski about the age of consent. How many of these issues do you see in the libertarian space generally? And what do you think we can do about them?
It's tough. It's like it's very cliquish, especially in the creator space. So like anyone who has a show or has content that they're pushing out there, it's very high school kind of like cliquish, and so that does create a little bit of an issue because there's like allegiances and certain people are just kind of like aligned with others or they're trying to get others. And so they're, I guess, less likely to be like critical of those people. That's why I kind of like appreciate your perspective, Jeremiah, because you're like, look, I'm just going to call bullshit whenever I see it. Like I couldn't give a fuck about, whether that person's ever going to come on my show or whatnot. Like I'm just going to call it out. Right. In terms of like what we could actually do about it, I think the answer is that we have to have a lot less people who purport to be thought leaders is what I really think. I think we need more practitioners and less thought leaders because at the end of the day, you can be a thought leader and spout whatever thing you're saying and sound convincing, and people will be like, oh, well, that person sounds fantastic. If you're an actual practitioner, I mean, results speak louder than any kind of words that you could put out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the real truth serum, is whether or not someone's actually performing, right? And so I think there is a slow, and it needs to be faster, but there's a slow movement towards more of, and I'll use, us collectively, I guess, even though we're all individuals, but there's this slow push towards people that are doing more talk about actually doing things, as opposed to, who's like, whether Hoppa's dick is bigger than Rothbard's or whatever. Like I'm all of that stuff just really kind of removes from what could be accomplished. And it just kind of, again, like libertarians and libertarian type people quite often are sitting there railing against this tribalism and this binary tribalism that gets people to, vote between A or B. And then the problem is that they stop at like, well, why not vote for C? And you're like, no, stop. No, we don't need to turn binary into trinary. Like, we don't need that. What we need is people that are like, fuck A and B. I'm going to go off and I'm going to do something way off the reservation and do my own shit, right? Like, that's what you really need. But yeah, it is so much like, I have flashbacks to high school quite often where people are like, oh, well, you made fun of Johnny and you're a fucking fag for doing it. Like, I mean, Jesus Christ, right?
Yeah, same. Well, and like, that's part of the thing. Like, the whole notion of like these spaces being more about like not annoying each other than solving problems. Solving problems is annoying. Secondly, like, a lot of these people are drunk or high all the time, and it's a fucking problem, because what that creates is the intellectual revolutions did not happen in fucking bars. They happen in coffee houses. They happen where people are trying to stay up and be stimulated and have interesting conversations.
Yeah.
They happened over tea. They happened over things that don't fucking destroy your brain cells. But you tell people, to get fit. You tell people to improve their own personal status. You tell people to clean their damn room before they do something, before they make recommendations, before they try and get on anybody else. You tell people to make their own fucking success. You tell people to be the action part of Agora Anarchy Action, and you're the bad guy because you weren't just allowing them to do what don't tell me what to do. That's an order, bitch.
Yeah. And that really goes to the heart of that. Like, everyone wants to be like the big brain person, right? Like that's the way it seems right now. Like, everyone wants to like hit that one liner, right? Like, they all want to have that, like, Michael Malice quote square, right?
Yeah.
That goes out. And quite frankly, you don't have to speak eloquently. Now, what's funny is you'd mentioned, like, revolutions where they're birthed and things like that. And a lot of people want to be like, oh, well, the American Revolution was birthed in bars and pubs. No, that's where they recruited the cannon fodder. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right? Like, but there's so many people that I think are on maybe the path. Like I think a lot of people are on that path that I still am on, and will probably be on until the day that I die. Is like, constantly asking why and when and does this make more sense than something else? That's fine, but you can't have a bunch of generals. You just can't. Like, not in terms of like ideological generals, right? Like, right. You have to have a bunch of people that actually get some shit done. And so, yeah, a component of that is being healthier, right? If the last 18 months or 24 months have taught us anything, that is imperative, right? Like, yeah. The idea of not having debt is a huge piece of it, right? Like, any of these things that you look at, like, it's really easy to understand how growing your own food would, like, separate yourself from centralization.
Hashtag food, not lawns.
Yes. Well, just anywhere. I love the idea of permaculture and like building a food forest and just being able to like walk out the door and freaking pick food and eat, right? But so the it's really easy to see how growing your own food would separate yourself from kind of that centralized system. What a lot of people miss is those other aspects of their lives that keep them beholden to the centralized system, being debt, personal health, their general living situation, right? Like their relationship with their family and their community. Like if you're alone on your own, you can still do it, but it becomes difficult. Like it becomes a lot more difficult because there are so many different aspects of life that it really just helps if you have like running mates to go with, right? Like and have someone that you can kind of like not necessarily depend on, but like have an equal share of like, okay, well, you learn first aid and freaking firearms, and I'll learn freaking growing and this, right? Like having a network of people that you could depend on to do those things is fantastic. But having a bunch of people who are like, you turn to them and you're like, oh, what do I need? How do I do this? And they're like, well, I read this once in a book. And you're like, okay, have you actually ever done it? And they're like, well, no, but it sounds pretty easy. Like, I mean, you should just be able to do it this way. That's not a good community, right? Like,
Right.
You can maybe withstand having one or two people in the community like that. Everyone else has to absolutely like have some skills and bring some value to the table.
Oh, and this is a real big gripe I have too. Not just doing it as a community. Like the Free State Project is fucking awful. Like, don't move everyone to a postage stamp. That is a good way for a tyrannical government to bomb you. That's a good way to be Waco. That's not a good way to be free. And it's a good way for, like, all these concentrated people who were moved out of another community because that community didn't like them for one reason or another, possibly related to freedom that they wanted, moving over to a single concentrated space that's going to, make the people there hate them. The people of Keene do not like libertarians now. And it's because, like, fucking Ian over there talking about how, yeah, you know what, we should probably have a conversation about the age of consent. Talking about how, we should probably have a conversation about making kids work. Think like stupid little, and then like, of course, the drugs that are running through these houses are just excuses for them to be raided, which is why they were sent to jail. Like I feel bad for that, but also specifically Ian Freeman can go fuck himself for his views on children consenting because they fucking can't. And when you get these mentalities where people are okay with having these sorts of like, oh, well, oh no, he didn't go there conversations at the expense of like maybe talking about war, talking about, police brutality, talking about the prison or the medical or the indoctrination or the media industrial complexes. And instead of talking about any of these, you're talking about like wanting to fuck a kid and whether or not that's okay. And like that makes like all the action that people do overshadowed because like, oh, you're decentralizing, you're getting to Bitcoin, you're etc. You probably just want to buy child porn, right? You probably just want to traffic your child slaves, right?
Yeah.
It's like, can we fucking push these people away and say, go fuck yourself? We're doing important shit and we don't need your... No, we can't. We want them on our shows. Well, not me, but certain other people.
Yeah. Well, so, it's there's definitely some things that get looked the other way on, or, again, like all the like edgy messaging, right? Like we need edgy messaging so we can wake people up and get their attention and stuff. I agree with that to a certain extent. I mean, first of all, Twitter's not real life. So like, yeah, whatever. I mean, like do whatever you want. Like if you want to be edgy on Twitter, then be edgy on Twitter, right? For me, so full disclosure, it is in my plan to move to New Hampshire, not necessarily specifically for the Free State Project. I was going to move out of New Jersey to somewhere within like the five-year time frame. And we did the math and we just looked at different states. In New Hampshire, it wasn't really the Free State Project that sold us. It was my wife wants winter, which I'm like, why? But she wants winter, and she's going to get a hell of a lot of it if we do end up moving to New Hampshire. But we looked at other states like, Florida and Texas, and Idaho was one of the ones that we looked at. And so we looked at a handful of them, and New Hampshire was the one that she wanted just based off of the state itself. But to your point, I agree with you. The mechanism by which this kind of like this ideological shift, or at least how things can start to move back in the direction of personal liberty and freedom, you can't be dwelling on these certain aspects of libertarianism or freedom of the individual that just completely quiet all of the really important shit that needs to be talked about, right? Like, I think that was the one thing that people who are part of like and full disclosure, like I'm active with Mises people, these Mises caucus folks that are like, well, the one thing that Ron Paul did effectively was the same thing that most politicians do effectively. He found 3 or 4 things, and just everything came back to those 3 or 4 things, right? Like he did not get entrapped in some of these other sidebar conversations that are these third rail topics, right? That just completely obliterate any positive conversation associated with the real main things that need to be focused on. So if collectively, if liberty-minded people can get their shit together and focus on those things, right? Like, you named a handful of them, right? If everything just comes back to that, then yeah, you can actually affect some change over the long run. But you get into all other levels of degeneracy too, where like, I don't know if you listen to Pete Quinones all that often, or Matt Erickson and Jason John Stapleton, Jason Stapleton. I always forget his first name. They've been talking about like more kind of this Machiavellian, like this post-libertarian kind of idea of things. And that's like, okay, well, using the state against itself and kind of working in that direction. Well, that's fine. Or I think Stapleton talks more about being like a nomad and essentially not being, prone to all of these, whether the wind blows one way or the other in California, he can move wherever he wants. Paying attention to all of these different kind of moving parts, that's fine. You buy into whatever you want to buy into, okay? But at the end of the day, do not get mired down in these other things, because like Quinones does make some really good points when it comes to like the kind of like almost the morality problem or the morality trap that you run into when you're talking about like, pure unadulterated freedom, right? So like, should sex work be illegal? No, obviously. Okay. Should we be out there trying to put like, a rub and tug parlor in every single mini mart in America? No, like that's not necessarily something that needs to happen, because there are certain natural consequences that are associated with different types of behavior. The same thing with, excessive drinking, excessive consumption of, narcotics or certain types of drugs, right? Like excessive amounts of anything can be bad, right? And anything that we can do to get away from that idea that it's like, oh, well, anything goes, and so you can do it. You could be a freaking heroin out freaking, prostitute, and anarchists are going to say that you're like living a good life, right? Like, no, I wouldn't view that as a good life. My good life is completely different than yours, but we run into some really bad problems if you take these things in absolute terms and then just extrapolate them to, adults should be able to have sex with kids because, age of consent laws are arbitrary and random. Yes, they're arbitrary and random, but if you try and touch my kid as an adult, I'm going to fucking end you. Like, there's a big dividing line between those two things, and having those conversations completely obscure the really important shit that needs to be talked about in the here and now.
Right, like, I fucking watched Thaddeus Russell call somebody an authoritarian imperialist because they're disgusted by the concept of an adult fucking a kid. And I'm like, no, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
but like, okay, so Matt Erickson, I made a video on him specifically
Yeah.
because I think that his particular approach is stupid. Um, I I understand not wanting to be degenerate, but he's not Christ built. He's not following the Bible. And when I tried to tell him the verses he was missing, that prove that he's like has a poor interpretation of the Christian word, he got like super offended and then blocked me, along with this other person called Anarcho-Hydism, um, who he was in the thread with. They both blocked me, um,
Yep.
because they couldn't cite any verses that disproved the verses that I cited. Um, so like they do it too. Their thing is like, we're going to make everything about this whatever pet issue we have stop being poor, and fucking cozy up to politicians and make enough money that you can do what you want. And if you want to do drugs, move to a country that lets you do drugs. And it's like, that's not libertarianism. Libertarianism isn't if you don't like it, leave. It's, I'm not leaving. I'm gonna make here better. And
Yeah.
when we like try this bullshit of like, I'm gonna see which politicians I can schmooze with to be left alone with my cocaine empire, that's not it. When I want a gun. How much money do I have to make? How much money do I have to give to the powers that should not be in order for them to leave me alone about my gun? It's not good. But you're not allowed to say that. You're not allowed to be open and honest and say these people are fucking wrong.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that, at least at present, the folks that are more talking on that kind of like wanting to be a knowledge leader kind of platform, if you are asking tough questions about something that might undermine their authority position on that specific tact that they're on, or whatever their kind of like pet ideology or slant on that ideology is at that moment in time. Again, it's that thing where like they're afraid. There's probably a element of fear where it's like, well, like if this isn't true, then what am I? And so I get that. There are certain people out there that are preaching things that are like their own beats, and those are the ones that I really gravitate toward. And some of them are disagreeable, right? Like Stapleton's actually a really good example of that, right? Like he's trying to build this group of essentially nomadic entrepreneurs that essentially can control their own destiny, which is not anti-agorism. Like that is in line with agorism, especially if you embrace blockchain and decentralized money and everything like that, right? So I really kind of like gravitate toward, and I haven't necessarily like bought into what he's selling, but I at least see something that I have a metric that I can like judge them on, right? Or judge their predictions on.
At the same time, agorism bars engagement in the pink and red markets, which means you can't work with the government at all. Just saying.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I think it's I think that's a fine distinction to make, because I don't think Stapleton would ever tell you like that he's an agorist. I would tell you that he is a proponent of like trying to be master of your own destiny, which at the essence of it is essentially liberty, right? Like that's what freedom is, right? The question is, how do you get there, right? For him, there's actually some receipts. Like I can see what he's doing, or like he can talk about like the success of a certain program or something like that, and be like, oh, okay, well, that looks like it was successful. Like, you get a 75% or whatever, someone who is speaking strictly on ideological terms, it becomes the religion debate all over again, right? Like, what was George Carlin's line? Like, people always give the wrong answer to the religion question. Like, do you believe in God? Like, no, dead, right? Like, do you believe in God? Yes. Okay, do you believe in my God? No, dead. My God's got a bigger dick than your God, right? Like, that that ideological kind of like, power struggle that happens within the liberty community is why it gets really difficult. Like there gets to be a lot of noise because everyone's having this ideological supremacy kind of fight to the top, and you're like, that doesn't really matter. Like, I mean, especially from someone from my standpoint who, yeah, I haven't been in this space for that long, but from my standpoint, like, I don't think any one like anarchist or libertarian thinker had it nailed. Like, I mean, Rothbard, like late Rothbard kind of sucked, right? Like, I mean, like, that's just
Kinda.
like the nature of things,
Very
right?
generous.
Like, yeah, I mean, like, so, to get to this point where like you're like, oh well, my ideology is better than yours or whatever, that's never ever going to resonate with me, because I'm like, I see elements of all of these different thinkers coming together to, no single one of them had it nailed, right? Like no single one of them understood the nature of liberty, or at least the solution of how to get there, right?
Mm-hmm.
But many of them had these different components to it. And so when you try and piece that all together, for me, it looks much more like individual action in a place or a time that you can actually control, or have some level of control over the outcome, and whether that's going to be positive to your life and or those that are immediately around you in your family and community. It doesn't look like, oh well, if you're a hoppy and get the fuck out, or like, like those things don't really make that much sense to me anymore. And it's part of the reason why, like, for a long time I would have considered myself an atheist, because I was raised Baptist, and I got to a point where I was like, man, how would someone condescend to think that like one religion has it nailed and everyone else has it wrong, and those billions of people that believe wrong are going to hell? Like, that just seems extremely pretentious, right? So yeah, that's one of those things where, like, and I see Moda said Konkin had it nailed. Dude, Konkin is one of the ones that I've seen, and he's also one of the more recent, right? Like relatively recent thinkers, if you combine him with like Hoppe and a couple of the others. And so they benefit from the generations of seeing, what worked and what didn't work over time. And he also benefited from having that direct juxtaposition of early Rothbard versus late statist Rothbard, or at least partyarchy Rothbard, to draw that parallel from. But even like, even to Moda's point, like, Konkin's not infallible. There's probably some components there that, need to be worked on over time, but we all benefit from him moving the ball forward. So yeah, I think the more we can do to be acting individually or as a community to control what we can actually control and to make positive impact in places that we can, I think is going to do a lot more over the long haul than, some kind of bullshit ideological purity test or pissing contest that happens amongst, the people that have big followings and stuff like that. I think all of that ends up being noise.
Well, and also to that point, Konkin, we're about to find out a lot more about what he thought, because Victor Koman of CoPubCo is digitizing all the like boxed up manuscripts and shit of Konkin's old writings. So you'll be able to find those at the Agorist Archives, I think. I want to say that's what it's called, but I don't remember. But you'll be able to find it there relatively soon. And then, like, with all that, because that's the thing. Like, I've been in this space, the libertarian bullshit content creator space, for like a decade now, and it sucks ass through a coffee straw. It's very not good, and the more I find out about it, the less I like it. And I've been blackballed in so many spaces. There are literally spaces where it's against the rules to bring me up. Like, there's a lot of and that one of the spaces, like, there are multiple spaces like that, but one of the spaces there, the reason is that they were harboring racists, fascists, and pedophiles, and I pointed that out. I'm such a bad guy. So, like, I've gotten a lot more time to be a lot more cynical. I don't necessarily want you to be more cynical. I'm not recommending my fucked up psychology that's not very healthy for me. But what I will say is that, like, I think you might find yourself a lot more down the line shuffling around which people are willing to be, like, the best, are willing to actually put their money where their mouth is, which people are actually superior. Because ultimately, I'm not going to listen to a Christian or somebody who's talking about the Bible if they're not going to respect Bible verses. I'm not going to listen to somebody who's talking about human rights if they take advantage of children and their lack of proper brain development. I'm not going to take somebody seriously as a libertarian if they think genetically they've already deterministically become better than everybody else because of their race or their sex or, whatever. Those people are threats to libertarianism, and I think a lot of people who call themselves libertarians aren't. Like, they don't like to talk about where the money came from for Pinochet. They don't like to talk about the fact that the reason that they like him so much is because libertarians fucking jacked off about him in order to justify helping him do his fucking tyranny, his murderous fucking tyranny. The CIA helped him get money through the Chicago Boys, who were, alleged libertarians. Maybe we shouldn't do that. Maybe we should. And then when I was on this Libertarian Slugfest stream not too long ago, and fucking Keith Knight got very irritated with me because I had the audacity to say that, maybe, just maybe it matters where the money comes from, and the fact that it comes from the Coctopus is a fucking problem, and Konkin was right. And then people in that stream were saying things like, Konkin was a loser or something like that. And it's like, shut the fuck up. You do not amount to shit on anyone's shoe, and you're calling him a loser? What? So my ultimate goal here is to, try and say that, I'm all about, that panarchist thing, the bottom unity, the real bottom unity, the bottom of the chart, as in everyone. But you have to get there from a perspective of understanding what people think first, and that can't happen if you shut down conversation, if you block people, if you remove them from your circles, if you, shame them for having the wrong opinion. I understand accountability. If you can prove that somebody's full of shit or a scumbag, then absolutely, that's what I try to do. I try to prove my points concretely. But ultimately, if you can't, if your only basic differences in aesthetics, then fuck off. Every anarchist could potentially find common ground with each other. Everybody who calls themselves anarchist, if they were willing to actually be rational about what their goals are and what anarchy is. And the only real thing that matters, the crux of all of this, is that it doesn't matter what stripe of libertarian you are, anarchist, etc. What really matters is whether or not you like the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise. I'm sure that's what the crux of the real issue is.
Always will be. I think to blow some people's minds too, or maybe I won't, and I'm just being full of myself. But there are a lot of people out there that live a life that far more embodies liberty and haven't read Rothbard or Konkin or name the anarchist or libertarian thinker. There are just some people that are inherently doing things, and that's the key, is they're doing things, and they don't even know that they're being agorist in doing it. They don't know that they're living necessarily a life of liberty. I mean, any person out there, any nerd out there who's 3D printing firearms might just be doing it out of curiosity or because it's a challenge and it's something to do. Have they read Rothbard? Probably not, right? Have they read fill in anarchist libertarian thinker's book here? No, and that's the other dynamic, is you have a lot of people that and I'm not immune to it. I have a stack of books freaking sitting here waiting for my attention. But you have a lot of people that kind of live libertarianism, theoretically, and they're much more apt to dive into a book than to put something into practice. And that that needs to be fixed, or like I can't fix it for anyone, but like hopefully that trend starts to move in the other direction where it's not just thinkers anymore, it's mostly doers,
Right. So what would you say then to, let's say you made a statement to statists and then a separate statement to libertarians? What would they be?
In terms of what, like trying to sell them on liberty, or
In terms of trying to get them to see things your way.
like in terms of my personal perspective, if I was speaking to someone in the liberty community, I would tell them that my personal perspective is that I should have, and this is typically a liberty talking point, is like I should have dominion over myself and those people who are in my charge, right? Meaning my kids, okay? And I owe nothing to anyone else, with the exception of the fact that, if I do expect things of others, I am obviously now having to contract with them, right? That is basically take that, extrapolate it, that's my entire existence, right? Like, it's just, I owe things to myself. I'm contractually, okay, and some people would say spiritually bound to my wife. And then I owe things to my children because I condescended to procreate, and they are reliant upon something. I mean, like, we didn't get into the age of consent aspect of things, but I think age of consent more so relies on a parent or a guardian's say in terms of when a child reaches the age of consent for whatever, tobacco or sex or guns or whatever, right? Like, because those are the only people that truly understand that individual being a child and have some kind of cognizant idea of when they would actually get to the age of majority be able to understand.
You probably wouldn't like my statement there. I like 22 because then the prefrontal cortex is fully developed, at least like for the majority.
I can tell you that at 22, my middle child is my only son. He probably still won't understand the ramifications of some of these decisions. But I agree with you that there is certain physiological things that have to happen, or psychological and neuroscience developments that have to happen. I agree with that. But at the end of the day, where I come at it from is like, okay, well, do I want to judge or a police officer being the final arbiter of whether or not my child is, capable of being able to make a decision or not? No, they're in my charge until they're not. Right. And so in that instance, like, it's kind of a parent's job to assess those kind of tolerances over time to see, where they're at in terms of what you can, trust them with or expect them to be able to do on their own, But so in terms of me talking to liberty people, it would be just that. It's, I don't owe very much to anyone else, with the exception of the fact that if I, condescend to contract with them or build a relationship with them, that's now a negotiation. It's a voluntary interaction. If I'm talking with statists, my conversation has something to do more so with talking about the extremes to which things could go wrong.
Yeah.
Right. And so, and it looks different depending on the statist that's in front of me. And so the person who is very much, a perfect example would be Medicare for All, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of Medicare for All people on the left, these kind of like, or what used to be the left, I guess, these Bernie bros and stuff like that. And so the question I ask them is like, okay, well, if you institute Medicare for All, and then in 6 months, if Republicans take over the legislature and gut Medicare for All, are you going to be happy? And they were like, no, obviously not. And they're just like, well, why would you fucking allow them to do that? Right? Like, you're putting in place something that could be co-opted or adulterated or stripped, or like, so you're essentially just okay with the solution when the people that you agree with in power are there to babysit your preferred solution.
Right.
But as soon as someone new walks in, it just completely destroys what you worked so hard to put in place. And in most cases will probably make it a net negative and not a positive anymore. you could do the same exact thing, like on the flip side with Republicans, right? Like, any single time, like, I mean, take it with like what's happening in some of these states where they're, stopping mandates and stuff like that, or like making them illegal. And you're like, okay, well, how would you feel if like what is it? School choice is a big one, like vouchers, right? And you're like, oh, well, vouchers are the way to get us to the point. I'm a gigantic unschooler. Like, I believe in unschooling. I think school is just a fucked up thing. Like, having industrialized education is absolutely ridiculous. But vouchers, every Republican in the entire world is like, oh, well, we need vouchers and we need, money that follows the student. And I was like, well, what happens if the Democrats take over the legislature and they put a rider on there that the only place that you could take your money has to teach CRT?
Right.
Now what? Right?
Of course, just to be clear, CRT pretty much isn't taught to kids, but that's a separate subject.
Yes, it's they get it by now my science language is by osmosis. It's basically how they get it. Yeah.
Well, the general thing, like critical race theory, is about like putting race theory up and then asking people to challenge the race theory. That's the whole point. So, like they give that to like college students, like people who are already like, but like. Yeah, and also, of course, if you really want to fuck with a Republican about vouchers, instead of just, like, getting rid of public schooling altogether, tell them that the voucher system didn't work in the USSR.
Yeah. I mean, quite frankly, I would be happy with the voucher system as a, homeschooling, unschooling family if now, again, I wouldn't be totally happy because, again, it's the result of taxation and the money comes from where it comes from. But, if you're giving me money to educate my kids and like, put together a curriculum for them and like, freaking take them world schooling, every year based off of the amount of money that they spend per pupil, like I wouldn't necessarily be like, oh, well, no, take the money back. But at the same time, that's not going to be the way it works, right? Yeah. Like, there's going to be a finite places still that you can end up deploying those funds. And as soon as that happens, as soon as there's any kind of restriction or limitation on it, who approves the restriction or the limitation now becomes extremely important. And now the power structure is just shifted from one seat to another.
Right. Yeah. You should have on, I had a teacher on my show. She was like essentially a tutoring facilitator, something like that. And she quit and pulled her son out of school to unschool him, and it had some great success in the end. You might want to have her on.
Yeah, I saw that episode. It was really good. Yeah, I'm definitely looking at having more, and I love the fact that she comes from a teaching perspective on that one. So yeah.
So we're brushing up on 1 hour and 45 here. Why don't we call it? I'm going to be on your show relatively soon, so we can address what we didn't address today, and probably also rehash some of this stuff just to get people up to speed. But ultimately, the takeaway: we should all be doing more, and we should all be working together more, because this click-ass high school bullshit, it works better in high school.
Yeah. I don't know. Does it work in high school? I mean, it exists.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, 100%. I'm on board with that. And I don't know, it might be Pollyanna-ish of me, but I'm always looking for the positive in someone until they, like we were talking about before in terms of talking about, philosophy professors, until they prove the fact that there literally isn't something to kind of like draw a parallel to or kind of find some common, but that's always going to be my perspective. So hopefully we can embrace that a little bit more genuinely in the future as a community.
So with that being said, where can people find you and what should they look forward to?
Sure. On any of the major social media platforms, if you just look up Ungovernable, I think on Facebook I had to make it Ungovernable Pod, but you'll see it on there, big old yellow anarchy symbol. You could also go to my Linktree, so it's just linktr.ee/ my Twitter username, which is Matt_Archy, ARCHY. And yes, I have to get on Cointree. That has been something that has been on my to-do list for a while. Dude, crypto last couple of days has been on fire. And we definitely have to talk a little bit more. I know there's a couple of crypto blockchain platforms that you're on, and there's a couple that I'm on that you might not necessarily be on as much, but there's one right now that's allowing people to be the private equity firms for development for future dApps, which is absolutely insane. It also provides liquidity into the platform because everyone's always going to say, oh, well, cryptocurrencies give me whiplash because they're back all over the place. This is a way of reinvesting into it so that you don't have to worry about market makers arbitraging and basically blowing up the currency every 6 hours. It thins out the float, so to speak. So yeah, tons of stuff to talk on that front. So, and look, I want to say thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. This is really fun. We're definitely going to have you on. I want to talk some OPSEC, man. I want to talk about some technical stuff, talk about do something, you know.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, and if y'all like this, feel free to like, share, subscribe. Also, it'll be on library. You can go to jeremiaharding.com/LBRY to get access to the library platform. That's my personal referral link. That's the reason I do that, and also because it's a bunch of bullshit characters after a string, and this is something I can remember. So feel free to go there to get access to that, and you can find this uncensored in case YouTube decides we were too based. But with all that being said, feel free to like, share, subscribe, blah, blah, blah. And I'll see y'all next time. Smash the fucking state.
Thanks, brother.